What is the difference between being punk and being a punk?
We are here to talk some punk rock, some music, comics.
Punk culture, DIY shit, anything we want to talk about.
That's what fascinates me. Give me everything. Absolutely everything.
I find that music and comics have always been intertwined.
Muckspout.
Chicks dig it. Don't worry.
Hey, welcome to Muckspout, episode 10.
I don't know.
Yeah, whatever. It stops mattering after a while, right? We're brought to you by Stupid Rad Merch Company. They make some stupid rad merch. It's anything.
It is stupid. It is rad. It is merch. If you're looking for any of those three things, that's where to go.
And so I got Ben with me. I'm Eric. And John is taking some time off right now from the podcast to take care of some personal things. And we look forward to his return. And we send him our well wishes.
Mm-hmm.
And Ben, you want to kick us off with our topics?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I first want to say I want to start with some good news. So my band put out a new song last December on Christmas Eve, actually. And we just reached 25,000 views or 25,000 streams on Spotify, which is kind of a cool feeling because like never had anything do that well.
That's got to be at least like 20 cents or something, right?
Well, that's the joke, right? So
we'll get into that a bit more later.
What's that?
So we'll probably get into that a bit more later, but
I feel like getting into it right now, actually.
Okay.
You know, I did the math because I like math. So I looked up one of my favorite venues in the city to see what their capacity was. And it was 450. Okay, Lee's Palace here in Toronto.
Okay. Famous in Scott Pilgrim.
Scott Pilgrim, yeah. Well, a lot of most of the venues in Scott Pilgrim are Toronto. Mm-hmm. And I played at most of them. Lee's Palace is my favorite, though. Yeah, so Lee's Palace can hold 450 people. So I did the math, and 25,000 streams in a month is about 800 listens a day for 30 days. So essentially, we could play almost 2 packed Lee's Palaces back to back, 7 days a week for a month, and that would be equivalent to the amount of streams on Spotify. But we'll get 50 cents.
Yeah.
It's a little weird.
Yeah, it's pretty jacked up.
Well, it just seems like the math is, I'm not saying that I want all the money that I would get from ticket sales to Lee's Palace. Right. But even then, probably not going to get much of that either. So, like, that's kind of the subject at hand today.
It would be one thing, though, if there wasn't a lot of money coming from that and you were just not getting a lot of money because there wasn't a lot of money. But there's a lot of money flowing through there with ad revenue and all that. And
that's 100% true.
That's the real problem. It's not the problem that it's not making a lot of money, because it is. It's that you don't get any of it.
Yeah, and further to that, I don't know how much it is to buy stock in Spotify, but the majority of the funds that go into record companies' hands, and I learned this thanks to the Canada Land podcast, particularly the show Commons. They're doing something on Monopoly. And for anybody who listens to podcasts, Canada Land is fantastic. They do amazing work. And they're sort of like a journalist. They started as a journalism sort of critique show, and they've branched out into all sorts of different things. I don't know if you remember, there's a Canadian dude named John Gomeshi. He was a personality on Canadian television on the Canadian Public Broadcasting, CBC. Mm-hmm. And very, very famous and very successful in journalism. And some information came to light that he had done some pretty terrible things with women and
Oh.
kind of used his power in very dark and also really just weird ways,
Oh, no.
like uncomfortably weird ways. And it all became public because of Canadaland. They were the first people to kind of key into it. And the dude who did it was warned by all his journalist friends, don't talk about this. Don't do
Uh,
this. This is, career suicide. And he did it anyway. So anyway, that's Canadaland. And
okay.
so they recently did a piece on the monopoly in music. And the record companies in early 2000s, probably somewhere around 2010, um, made a deal with Spotify where they basically negotiated the terms for how much they would get per stream. And they got to dictate the downstream ancillary costs, like what cut they were gonna take, and so on and so forth. They made that deal with Spotify, and there's a part of the contract apparently where they have like a privileged status, so they have first access to all the playlists. They basically control the platform.
So okay, I never thought. Okay, so I've always thought of it as Spotify is making a whole crap ton of money, and the cent pennies are going from them. But I guess I've never considered that the record company is getting a chunk, and
It's
the
a
pennies are
cartel,
coming
man.
from the record company.
Yep, it's a cartel, and I mean that in the truest sense of the word. Like, I'm not saying this is not hyperbolic. Like, a cartel is an organized criminal organization that controls a resource,
Uh-huh.
right? Um, in this case, the resource is just something that we don't think about. But music is a resource.
It's just legal.
Like, yeah, and I think it's one of the most human things that we do.
Mm-hmm.
Along with carpentry and food. It's kind of up there. So, you know, the it's weird how, and this kind of connects with the recent information that came out from Wizards of the Coast as well about we almost had another sort of contractual stifling of creativity. Um, and in that case, it looks like the community responded.
So I guess for anybody who isn't as familiar with that,
Mm-hmm.
so Wizards of the Coast is the owner of Dungeons and Dragons these days, and they've always had an open license for people, podcasters. There's people that put together YouTube channels based around playing Dungeons and Dragons. They all have their characters, and people watch it. And they were basically revoking that license or tightening it and looking to profit off of it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, after years of being open, and there's some there's like full businesses built around this now, and that was going to be like crashing, but people went up in arms about it, and we were able to stop it.
Yeah. I guess the question for me is there's also been some recent developments with the YouTube monetization system where independent media organizations are being silenced under and I don't take this lightly, but under the guise of misinformation, which,
Mhm.
regardless of how you feel on the political spectrum, I think we can all agree has been weaponized and misused a fair amount in the last few years. I've been misinformed about misinformation, one could say. Um, and, you know, beyond, like, I mean, Dungeons and Dragons, well, arguably it's like, who gives a shit? It's just a game. Who cares? But, you know, speaking from, like, with my musician hat on, I gotta say, like, you ignore this at your peril,
Mhm.
because I never had a choice as a fan of music back in the day to make different choices about how I pursued music. I remember when Napster came out,
Yeah.
and it seemed like this revolution, you know, and I was poised. I was 14 years old, and I had a first period computer class, and it was like, God damn, I'm downloading albums, bro. Um, and I would say without any sort of doubt that if it hadn't been for Napster, I don't know if I would be a musician. The amount of access that it gave me. And I remember labels freaking out and saying that this was not going to be good for business. But I also remember a lot of great music being distributed
Yeah.
independently. It's not a coincidence that the rise of Napster and the rise of indie music happened simultaneously. They're part of the same equation.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much more great creativity we could have if the labels hadn't litigated music sharing into oblivion, because now it's a business, unfortunately.
Right.
I just wonder what kind of change would have happened. And D&D, it's like, yeah, who cares? People said the same thing about music, and here we are. And like, let's be honest, radio sucks.
Yep.
It's not by
As for
accident.
a long ass time. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't take long learning about radio and how like its decline and the reasons for that, before you realize it's the same fucking people. It's the music labels purchased shell companies that purchased radio frequencies,
yeah.
and now here we are.
And the
Like,
indie
I
stuff
remember the
is all
day.
relegated to 2 a.m. on on Sunday nights. Like,
Yeah. Like, I remember the day that I learned that there was a Virgin Radio in Toronto, and I was like, a what? Like, why? How is that even illegal?
right.
That seems insane to me. Like, the only one that should be guaranteed, in Canada at least, is the one that's publicly funded. And then definitely don't trust it. Like, find some alternatives.
Right.
Make sure that you can verify, at least. Yeah, it just seems like everybody's coming for the creatives right now. And like, I worry about what that means.
Well, you think of
You know?
all the times, like even when it comes to even creating comics and things, but like the amount of times you have to stop and think, is what I'm doing, like, am I doing something that's got a copyright on it? Like, you have
Yep.
to stop and think like a lawyer, and all that legal stuff is so over anybody's head that isn't a lawyer, that you're just like, it feels like you're gambling constantly with properties. And even just
Yeah. When was the last time that you saw a story that had a laser sword in it?
right.
I'm not about to try that shit.
Right.
It's like, you don't even have to make it illegal. I don't know if it's copyrighted. I'm not going to find out.
Right. I can't
It's
afford to
scary.
lose my house. Like, and you will.
Yeah, it's a chilling effect, right? And it stifles innovation.
And when
Go
it
ahead.
comes to music, like before we started this podcast, we had several conversations about having music on the show and
Mm-hmm.
promoting bands that way. And we
We
had
talked to like dozens of different people trying to figure
yeah,
out if there was a way to do it. Like people experienced in podcasting and also music couldn't
yep.
find a single way to make it happen.
Nope. Nobody does that if they're in podcasts, because we don't make any money off of this. We can't afford lawsuits for that. And it doesn't even matter if you could have a dozen emails saying that it's okay to use a music track on your show. As soon as a record company has access to that and is monetizing it, your show is getting shut down.
Yep.
So,
Yep. And like the thing that I can't get around, the thing that makes no sense to me when I try and work this out is it's the dumbest move in all of business history. Because you know how much money you could make if you partnered with people instead of treating them like slaves?
mm-hmm.
Like at the end of and now it's getting to the point where people who want to go to shows are being treated like slaves. Like the Ticketmaster fiasco.
Yeah.
The fact that Ticketmaster and Live Nation were allowed to be the same company, that no one raised
Yeah.
a single stink. Musicians have been, I don't know if you were watching, but musicians have been testifying in front of the Senate
Yes.
because of this issue.
Clips of that. That's wild.
Yeah, but it's like, isn't the Senate the reason this happened in the first goddamn place?
And it's wild that it's not new at all, and it was never. I mean, like, was it Pearl Jam in the '90s that went up against Ticketmaster? Like,
Yep.
and it just kind of faded, and it never got fixed.
Nope.
And I didn't go to. There was a long period where I didn't go to a show that was sold by Ticketmaster. I was going to small shows at the door, like, and so like I remember a couple years ago, I wanted to get tickets to Weezer,
Hmm.
and I put the tickets in my cart, got to the end, and they damn near doubled in price. And I was like, I can't afford these tickets anymore. Like, I just can't justify that cost. I was okay before, but now it's like $70, $80 more. I can't do that.
That's insane. And you know what really grinds my gears about that is like if you're gonna fuck me, just say you're gonna fuck me.
Yeah.
Why do I gotta go through the entire checkout process before I find out there's a dick involved? Like,
And you know what? There's times where I'll be going to buy something, and there's and other services and stuff where the product might be $30, and then when you get to the end, it tosses on $10. Even on some Kickstarters, where I think that
yeah,
I'm like, all of a sudden the shipping comes into it, and you're like, ah, fuck. But like,
yeah,
if they were charging me $40 initially, I might have been okay. But it's that shock at the end where all of a sudden there's an extra $10, and I'm like, oh.
yeah, yeah.
So
And even let's get into the Kickstarter situation too. Why are shipping costs so high? Could
yeah,
it be perhaps that there's only a handful of companies that control all the shipping in North America and they dictate the terms for the rest of us?
yeah,
Like, once again, we're slaves. This is ridiculous. Like, it doesn't seem like there's a single place you can turn that hasn't been turned into a billboard or had spikes put on it so you can't sleep on it, or it's kind of nuts.
yeah,
I'm just trying to wrap my head around where, we are a punk rock podcast. Well, what is punk rock? It's supposed to be the musical representation of freedom, like raw, unadulterated freedom,
yeah,
where you can actually participate in a borderline violent act with your friends. As long as no one gets hurt, it's all good. Like, moshing is not, it's not a kind process.
right,
It's not a hug, you know. And the music that we're listening to is not, the gentle tones of Mozart.
right.
There's an aggression and a violence to it. We're allowed to do that. We give ourselves license to do that together in a room. Like, where are the free places now? I don't know. Like, I worry about that. There. I remember when skateboarders could go down the street, and now there's no place to grind. So why the fuck would they do it?
One of the last bastions of freedom, I think, is like the complete opposite of punk rock, is like the library, and that's hanging
Yeah,
on for dear life.
yeah. It's the library was always a free place, though. I think the fact that it's the last bastion is kind of sad
Yeah,
because it was supposed to be the place you go when nothing else was happening. It just means nothing else is happening. I guess the what I would like to discuss, if we're able, is how do we take it back?
hmm.
Because all this history we have, all these stories of proud epic music moments, or great comic books, or um, beautiful stories that were told, like Star Wars or whatever you want to choose, Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings, that kind of thing. How did it all become about creative control and monetization? And how do we stop that from happening? How do we not even stop it, but just build something else that's out of that room?
I think one thing is like I mean, as an artist, it's shit's expensive to make. And so like you need funding. So you're always trying, like, your goal often, no matter how indie you love to be, your goal, like if somebody says, I can publish that for you, like you have to think about it because it's so damn expensive to do it yourself. And then once you're doing that, you're potentially losing something in that. I mean, you have to lose something because somebody's got to gain something to bother with you anyways.
Hmm.
So I think that, I mean, money is kind of the root of the problem, like from the get go.
Do you do you think it might be just that money doesn't have an actual, like, foundational value anymore? Like my problem isn't money. I used to think it was, like when I was younger and I didn't really understand how economics works. I used to be like, money is a problem. We should just abolish money and problems would get solved. And I've realized, no, we just replace it with shells or cords or
Right. Something
dirt,
else is
like
money.
some, yeah, we're gonna need some sort of form of currency. But now I'm kind of like, I think the issue might be that eggs don't have an inherent value. Like the actual stuff that we buy with the money has lost its like its relevance. So
Yeah.
it's like one day eggs are $2 and one day they're 20. Well, I can't budget for that.
Right.
I can't plan for that. There's too much chaos. And then on top of that, it's like I'm trying to be a creative person,
Right.
but if I'm spending so much time just busting ass trying to pay for a carton of eggs, I don't have much time with drumsticks in hand, you know?
Right.
Or you don't have time with a pencil in your hand, you know? And I feel I feel anxious about this in it, like a angry and anxious,
Mm.
because as we talked about with Billy on the last episode, I need I need to be a drummer for
Right.
everyone's sake.
Right.
I'm doing y'all a favor. I got energy. I need to get out. I'm getting it out, you know? And I feel like that's everybody, man. You know, we need to find a way to I don't think we can actually fight the system. I think that's a misconception. Maybe that's just the old man in me.
I think, but I think there's a lot of avenues now to leave the system,
I
and
think we should build something else.
yeah, I mean, there's
We're gonna
there's
have to
some
do it
of that
together though.
when it does come to like the Kickstarters and even Bandcamp, when they do their Bandcamp Fridays, where where all the money goes like to the person, like the creator, like there are like avenues for that,
Hmm.
that kind of have started in recent years.
Yes.
We got John Westoff in the house,
Nice. What's up, John?
or at least we had him in the house. Hopefully, he's still around.
It's all good.
John's the writer on my number 6 favorite comic of last year.
Oh yeah.
Just
Drumsticks
missed
of
that
Doom?
top 5. Drumsticks of Doom. We'll have him on soon.
Yes. Yeah. Very excited for that conversation too. Two of my favorite topics: comics and drumsticks.
There you go. So yeah, like there are Kickstarters and things like that where people are directly supporting the creators to create the things that they're trying to create.
Right.
Still comes back to money, I guess, on that one, but
Well,
there's a sense
Kickstarter
of
has
community around that. That's
yeah,
that's a start.
Kickstarter has really definitely um, catalyzed something that was missing from the creative community, which is the ability to self-fund through crowd support. And I think it's undeniable that if there's no Kickstarter, there's also no Patreon. And Patreon is responsible for a lot of creative people staying in the game. So
Yep.
there is a way. I guess, and you know what? Maybe this is an unnecessary concern now that I'm thinking about this. Why do we spend so much time worrying about what's on the fucking radio if no one's listening to it?
Right. I don't
You know,
even
I
think
never.
about the radio. I think about that just as often as I think about cable TV because I don't have that either. Like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. You know, it's like who cares who gets on a Spotify playlist? Just stop using Spotify. Um, yeah, that's pretty good solution. But I watched we talked about this a little bit on the group chat about this documentary called Punk
yeah,
that was co-produced with Iggy Pop, and the way they lay out the process is very interesting because like punk really started in the 70s, but it didn't really get its attention. Like we think of punk as like this, it's everywhere. But up until we were kids, it was pretty much nowhere.
Hmm.
And the transition point was just, it was like this explosion, that like this kind of supernova that happened all at once. But it had been building forever. So there was like 25, 30 years of go fuck yourself. And then like, we're going to do it anyway. We don't care what you think. And then 5 years of holy shit, it's happening. And then it felt like the the air got pulled out of the balloon a little bit because all the money got involved,
Right.
and it kind of split the community. So a lot of the things that we've talked about in the early days about, what is punk, what isn't, who defines these things, this is all the debate of our generation, because before that it didn't matter. There wasn't there was just punk. There was like the stuff that was really loud and aggressive that was only playing in occasional venues across the country. That was all there was for punk. There was no need to like split it up. But
Right.
after that mainstream moment, all of a sudden we had to think about, like, what is that punk?
Is that punk still? Like
Right.
the band kind of changed. Are they still punk?
Yeah. Is that punk to me? You know? Yeah, and that started the argument. I think we should go back to, I think what punk is the state of mind when you're doing it.
Hmm.
I think we should find a way to get back to that. I don't know if there's like, maybe there's a Kickstarter for music. How does music do on Kickstarter? Do you know?
I mean, I've seen some bands like last year, the Stereo put out their like I see bands putting out vinyl, some relatively good size bands, but small bands, I don't know. Um,
Yeah.
I know that it's happened, but I'm not
Well,
sure.
maybe the
Like,
challenge.
well,
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just not sure how big, like how much money they're actually getting from them. If it's anything over
Yeah.
what they need to make the album, or
Yeah. The other problem with music that I guess comics or even role playing games might not have is that it's best in a group, happening in the moment.
mm,
And, shows are kind of what music is about. Like a
right,
movie, you film and then you cut and you put together and then you can show it 1,000 times. It's going to be the same movie. A
right.
song, when you see it live, you can't do a movie that way.
Yeah, I used
Imagine a
to.
live movie. All right, cut. Okay, move to that camera. Okay.
So last month we had Josh on, Josh
Yeah.
Caterer. I used
Hmm.
to work with them all the time on different things on online and stuff. So it was like early 2000s. I went and saw his band Duval play, probably 50 times or more. Like I'd every weekend I'd be out watching them once or twice sometimes, and
Yeah.
it was a great time. But people would ask me like, "You're going to see them again? Like, doesn't that get old? You just hear the same stuff all the time." And I'm like, every time I hear that song, it's new again. Like
Yeah.
it's not just listening to this. I've heard that song, sure, but I haven't heard it like tonight. Like,
Yeah. And you're not really like, I don't know, maybe you can speak to this better, but like, I always feel like when I'm seeing a band, even because like, I see a lot of the same bands too. I see a lot of the same fucking sets. If I'm
mhm,
opening, if I have a band opening with us for like two or three shows a year, I see them two or three times.
yeah,
And, it's usually the same music, same set, that kind of thing. And, but I'm not listening to the songs. I'm listening to the band, like
yeah. There's
the
an
individual
energy
members.
that's like just really that's goes beyond the music.
Yeah.
Like
100%.
I went last year. Jawbreaker played the House of Blues in Chicago for 4 nights. I went
Wow.
to two of them in a row, and I was kind of upset that I wasn't going to all four after those two shows. Like I wanted to keep feeling that. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, is like it's kind of a real-time event. So I guess this leads into the other side of the music situation. And I don't think it's a coincidence that music is the thing that's being assaulted from every direction, as opposed to some things are getting like D&D, role-playing games. there was this one company that was like, we want our cut, and everybody else was like, fuck you, buddy,
Yeah,
and they're like, okay, you know, that's kind of role-playing games in a nutshell. um but you know, the other side of music other than albums is access to venues.
Hmm.
That's like, from my experience, that is the hardest part about being a musician, is just finding a fucking stage.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's so damn difficult. Like, it doesn't seem like venues understand how music works, because they seem to think that if you have a bad band that people won't drink at your establishment,
Hmm.
as if their slow Monday would be ruined by a guy with an acoustic guitar singing kind of badly. You'll probably get more drinking. I would rather watch a guy struggle on a stage for 45 minutes while I drink my 2 or 3 beers than have to listen to Carry On My Wayward Son for the 7th time.
Right.
You know? Maybe that's just me.
Well, and I'll go to a show at a bar, and the people that are at the bar and at the tables and stuff that aren't up by the stage, they're just doing what they would do any other night anyways. Like, it doesn't,
Exactly.
like, good music doesn't affect them, so bad
You're
music
right.
isn't going to affect them. They're just there to drink and have a good night anyways.
Yeah. But there's also an advantage, an unseen advantage of having those terrible musicians struggle up there for 45 minutes every Monday, which is they get better
Mm-hmm.
and then they become real musicians. You know, I've never been a fan of Bob Dylan, but I imagine there was a time when everyone agreed that Bob Dylan sucked. And at some point, he was able to find his voice. I
Mm-hmm.
think his voice is annoying. That doesn't change the fact that he found it, and I'm grateful for that, because he did improve music in his own way by
Mm-hmm.
doing his own thing. I feel the same way about a lot of other, you know, like disco. I was not a fan of, but there are certain bands that did it in a way that I'm like, God damn, that's disco. I get it now. And if it weren't for that slew of, you know, subpar, in my opinion, projects, I wouldn't have been able to find that one gem. So like,
Mm-hmm.
we should be more grateful for terrible bands.
Right.
I just wish there was a place for them to play a little more often. Like, I was in a terrible band for a long time. I was in multiple terrible bands. I was also in a bunch of awesome bands that never got to play anywhere, you know?
Yeah.
That seems to be the crux of the issue for the music situation.
So do you
Is
think during COVID nobody could play anywhere, and
nope.
so everybody went online?
Mm-hmm.
That, like, stopped after COVID. And I know people are back to work and stuff, so you can't jump on maybe at 1 in the afternoon and get, but there are still people on the internet all times a day. And I
That's
don't
true.
see as much of that. It's kind of strange. Now, then, like, referencing again back to our last show with Billy, like, that's where he's doing it now. So
Yes.
there is that. But I used to, like, every time I go on Facebook, I'd see some band that I know on there playing some songs and like really utilizing that space. And
Yes. Well, my band, when COVID hit, the band that I was in attempted that. And I can tell you that there are some unseen barriers to entry that are hard to see for non-musicians. I can speak to this for comic creation as well, because I've always been a half decent writer. And I was like, I can make a comic. And then I started looking at how much artists cost, and I was like, oh shit.
even cheap artists, I mean, cheap, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
cheap. It's not
Yeah.
cheap to make a comic because you need a lot of art. It's not.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. And you need someone decent enough that it looks like art when they're done.
Yeah.
So, like, that's not cheap. You probably, if you give a shit about your comic, you're going to want a particular aesthetic, which means you got to be, you know, picky about who you bring into your fold. And then you're also rolling the dice on whether or not that person's reliable with deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you market? So there's all, and like, then we're getting into lettering. Lettering is its own thing.
Yep.
Covers are a separate scenario entirely. Printing costs, distribution. But I'm not even getting into that. I'm just talking about getting your first 5 panels. Hard enough.
Yep.
Music is a very similar thing, where if you're a fan of music, you don't really see all the moving parts. So if you want to have a live performance streamed online, you need everybody in the same room or some sort of like lossless connection where you don't have lag interfering with your performance. Because I can tell you, it's hard enough to keep everybody in time when they're all in the same room.
Right.
um, then the second thing that you need is, um, you know, properly mic'd equipment, and then a mixer, and then some sort of way to monitor yourself so that you can hear what you're doing and not just going, please God, I hope this sounds good,
Right.
which is what most live venues are like, but at least you can hear the music bouncing off the back of the
Right.
room.
That's true too.
Um, then you need a strong enough connection to be able to put this on, at least one camera, uh, with a half decent understanding of how to place it. Um, and we're not even getting into a good performance. That's just to put on a piss poor performance.
Right.
So it's difficult, and all of that. I think the issue is that all of that is on the musician. That there isn't an infrastructure to support the creation of music. Because like this is something that I've been struggling to try and resolve in Toronto. Not alone, but I'm one of the people trying to do it. Is how do we foster new musicians and encourage creative growth?
Hmm.
Because that's the source of all the good stuff. And it's the solutions are simple, but the execution seems to be impossible. Which is give them a place where they can work on their shit and find like-minded people to share in the effort, and let people know where they're doing it and when.
Yeah.
But there's somehow, it seems like all the fine print has made it impossible for that to happen. And that's a damn shame, because like what is the point of all this hard work and prosperity that we're supposed to be working towards if we can't listen to a fucking tune or two?
Right.
That's the thing I can't get my head around, is like, what is the purpose of controlling all this art? What is it, like, what does it do for the people who own it? What does it do for us? How does it help?
Yeah. And they often do hurt, like, well, even bands, the punk bands in the 90s, late 90s, when like there was the big boom, and then it kind of trickled because the albums that were being put out under the Geffen and stuff weren't weren't the same things that people have been listening to from those bands, and they all that money actually kind of hurt the sound of bands in some cases.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, the the financialization of music is the reason why everything sounds the same now. You know, um, I mean, every period has its sort of features.
Hmm.
I listen to a lot of. I have a friend who's like obsessed with 70s and 80s music. It's all he ever listens to, and like you listen to that stuff long enough, you start going, "Did everybody play in this key?" So it's a problem of music, perhaps, but it's also a problem of. Um, I think I might have mentioned this before, but the lead singer, or sorry, the lead guitarist of a band called Comeback Kid. I don't know if you know who Comeback Kid are.
Mm.
They were they were like one of the hardcore, one of the like tail end hardcore bands in the late '90s and early 2000s,
Okay.
and they were a lot of fun to listen to, but they didn't really get a lot of public attention, and it seemed to be in some ways political
Okay.
from their characterization of it. So anyway, the lead guitarist ended up kind of doing his own thing, and he decided to do a bit of a documentary style approach to writing an album, where he got all the producers that made all the quote unquote hits, like the producers for Nickelback, the producers
Mm.
for Justin Bieber, that kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
brought them in and said he wanted to make a punk metal album and wanted their input, and uh, just tracked what they said. and there were times where he would play like a riff or like a chord progression for them, and he said that at one point one of them stopped and said, "I like what you're doing, but if you change that F to an E, according to our research, it'll sell 20% more records." And like when I first heard that, I was like, that is not how this works at all.
That's
You
like in the
think that,
restaurants when they say, you know, if they use red in their logos and stuff, it's going to be like so many restaurants have red, like it's makes it
yeah,
conjures that hunger and stuff. Like
right. Yeah, that's the
when you
thing
bring
is
that
like,
into the
and
arts, you're not making art anymore. You're making money, I guess.
I've always felt this way about advertising. I remember like when I was a little kid, I remember asking my mom, how does anybody know how advertising works? And she was like, well, it's everywhere, so it must work. And I was like, but no one ever stops.
Yeah.
How do you know? Has anybody ever tried just like not advertising and see how it works? Because it might be just as successful. We don't know.
Right.
It's just, it's weird. Like the amount of things that we just kind of assume are successful because the people who do it are rich.
Right.
And it's like, maybe they just own it. Like, yeah, I don't know. I think, I think local shows need to make a comeback.
Mhm.
And I think that in some way we should be pairing this local scene stuff with online. We got to be able to marry these two worlds. I think that's really the solution. And I think that'll work for every scene. I think comics can be a part of the local scene as well. You know, punk was driven by the zine movement.
Yeah.
It really was. The
Yeah.
reason that you knew a band was coming to your town was because zines were being distributed. So,
Or like local
because,
papers that are essentially zines. Like we have the Illinois Entertainer by us, and
yeah,
you would go grab that and you would flip to the page that had the listings at the Metro, like all the
right.
time.
Yep. But even prior to that, there was a time where punk music couldn't be put in
Right.
the local news, and it was the zines and word of mouth that was making it work. We don't have those barriers anymore where we can kind of like broadcast. The thing is, we need to be curating who we're broadcasting to a little more effectively. I think we've been kind of deceived by this concept that we can be international superstars
Yeah.
because we have access to the whole world. Well, yeah, but the whole world has access to the whole world.
Right.
It's a bigger problem than we thought, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
and
who am I compared to like baby metal, you know?
right. And that's hard when like you're trying to make your living off of that sort of thing. Like I personally, I think I've mentioned before, like I like my job and I make my living there. I do this sort of thing because I can't play music, but I love music. Like music is so important to me that I want to be a part of it in some way. And this is something I can do. Or all my comics are very music based, and I've done album art and things like that. Like I want to be a part of music, even though I can't make it. And so I'm here. Like, and it's not like, you know, I'm not trying to be an internet star or any of that. And you can do that.
Yeah. But like the reason I'm doing this is because there's a conversation to be had and I want my voice to be heard. I don't care how many people hear it. I just I want to be on the public record. That's really all it is. I want my take to be on the public record. And I think that's the bare minimum we can ask for out of the goddamn internet, you know? Um, but there's there's like a separation that's happened amongst all of the different creative processes, and I think the internet is seen as a facilitator, but I think it was actually just a tool in the you know, the arsenal of the man,
Mm,
however you want to characterize that. It's, you know, the Napster days were a totally different universe in terms of what the internet could and could not do.
right.
It could not surveil me. Um, and it couldn't my ability to communicate with people was not limited in the same ways that it is now. And I wasn't limited by my own biases either. I think the algorithms make this very difficult.
Yeah,
I think it serves a very particular master, the algorithm, and it's not us.
that's true. Even when
Uh,
it comes to discovering music, because that's one of the things
yeah.
that was great about about Napster was I discovered so much music during Napster. And now I discover a lot of music through Spotify, and I often will go and purchase a vinyl from somebody. Like when you introduced me to Sprints, I ordered
Hmm.
their record as soon as it became available. Buster Shuffle, like there's a whole list of bands that as soon as I loved their music, I went and bought their album just to support them because I know listening to Spotify isn't. But the Spotify also does run on algorithms, and I'm being fed music constantly. I'm not stepping out of any kind of zone when I'm listening to music on Spotify. Like I there's probably stuff out there that I would love that isn't, pop punk and, and
That's the funny thing. When I with my coworkers, and there's a good circle of friends that I have as well, where um, when we're choosing music, uh, they generally turn and they're like, "Ben, what you got?" Because my tastes are so fucking weird. It's the only way to describe it. Like, I've always liked weird music.
yeah,
I like music that makes you go, huh? Like all the time. And so my tastes are so strange that my algorithm doesn't know what the fuck to do with me. And so it feeds me all kinds of interesting stuff. But that's a feature of my personality, and I wish it wasn't a feature of the program,
yeah,
because I have found that people get in boxes a fair amount because of the way that Spotify feeds music. Um, it even puts me in certain boxes, and I notice it. This is the thing for me. I notice it, and I'm like, I don't like that, and I start actively searching for stuff that's outside of that box, so that it changes my algorithm. I'm a psychopath like that.
yeah.
But I don't expect other people to be like that. I just wish it wasn't like the passive version, you
Right.
know, that everyone's just kind of being fed.
I got
The advantage. Sorry, go ahead.
when I got my Spotify Wrapped this past year, it was like, congratulations, you listened to 15 different genres. But then it was like skate punk, pop punk. Like it was just like lists of all different punk genres or subgenres. I'm like, yeah,
Right.
but did I?
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Did you decide those are 15 different genres?
Yeah.
Because, like, that's funny. Yeah. Yeah, that's a problem, though, right? Like, part of that Commons podcast that I was talking about earlier, that the host was talking about how he went to see a show where there was this punk band from here called the OBGNs. They're doing quite well. They played with Death from Above
Hmm.
and Pup recently, so they're on their way up. And I've seen them. I've seen them around. They're doing well, and they were opening for a hip hop crew here in Canada called Snotty Nose Rez Kids, and the host had never listened to Snotty Nose Rez Kids, but they're huge, so most of the crowd were there to see them, and they weren't there to see a punk band. But even he said even the most kind of like dissatisfied people were kind of coming around to the OBGNs by the end of the set.
Uh,
And he has consistently been listening to Snotty Nose Rez Kids ever since he saw that show. And like that's the advantage of the organic sort of local scene is
yeah.
you're not stuck in your box. And shows like that used to happen every day, all over the place.
It's actually it's less often that an opening band is a local band anymore too, isn't it? Like when it comes to big
That's true.
bands, like they roll
Yeah.
through in tours with two or three other bands, and you don't really get that local. Like I remember seeing OK Go when they were a little band
Mm,
opening up for They Might Be Giants, and they were a small band in Chicago, like, and there used to be all kinds of bands like that. But now when I go to a show, you don't really get that. You might get one opener that's small, but even when I saw Jawbreaker, now Smoking Popes did open for Jawbreaker, but that's not the same as a little band opening at this point. They had
yeah,
they had a comedian open for like open the show, but there was like no smaller bands really. It
yeah,
was Built to Spill and Smoking Popes and like bands that were pretty big in the '90s with them.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Part of the same algorithm, one could say.
right. Yep.
Yeah,
So yeah, even in those cases, like you don't get so many small. I mean, I remember seeing a lot of openers where I'd be like, "Ugh, they're awful," but like you said earlier, they get better. Like, you know,
yeah,
like Plain
yeah.
White
And
Tees. Well, I don't know. There was a time where they were better than when they were big, I guess, but there's some debate there.
sure, but that debate goes for every band ever, right?
Yeah,
Like,
right.
yeah, that's the thing is I I don't ever want to go to a show where every band is going to be exactly what would prefer to listen to.
Yeah,
I don't know what the fuck I want. I make music for a living. I don't know what the fuck I want. The average person knows even less than that. You know, like if there's anything that makes me good at my instrument, it's access to music that I normally wouldn't listen to.
yeah,
So, I don't know if we're doing ourselves any favors by limiting the scope for the sake, and this is the real crux of the problem for me. For what?
yeah.
$1? I don't know, man. It doesn't make sense to me. Seems like I would happily be poor as a musician for the rest of my life if it didn't mean, if it meant that this industry thing would collapse. I would happily just keep making music quietly for nothing. If it meant that this, you know, mechanism wasn't in place and I could play shows. If I could play shows to 1,000 people every, couple months and make nothing,
Right.
I'm in. Sounds great to me. How would you feel about that with comics? Like if you could continue to make nothing, but you knew you had a dedicated audience that would.
Yeah, I'm kind of already there. I wouldn't mind a little bit more of an audience, but I mean, I might
Yeah,
make it by the time I'm done with the Kickstarter and shipping out books and stuff. I break even at best usually. So it's
yeah,
I'm not somebody that's out there really pushing it and trying to grow in it. I'm getting done what I want to get done, really.
that's the thing. Like that's the goal is to get it out.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
creating art and I'm getting stories out that I feel I need to get out.
yeah, I think the deed is its own reward in this case.
Hmm.
That's how I feel about music. And, that to me is like we should maybe start implementing a strategy where breaking even is the rule. I think that would benefit the arts if we were to kind of organize ourselves so that whatever profits are made get reintegrated into making better art
I think that's
instead of.
you had I don't remember what your post was anymore, but I made a comment on one of your posts like last week that sometimes you're making a decision between am I making art or am I making a product?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I Let me think what that post was about originally. I can't recall exactly which one it is. I post too much.
Yeah, calm the fuck down, Ben.
Yeah, follow me on Facebook.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I I wonder if that would be maybe the move. If you were to require whatever artistic thing you're doing, if you make profit, it's got to go back into the product.
which is basically what I do now. You know what? So
Yeah,
like there's comic shows, and they're generally filled with people that want to work for like Marvel or DC in the end. Like, and then
yeah,
there's I love going to the Zine Fests more, and the Zine Fests are people trying to get stories out and trying to they're putting out their black and white things. Like I do kind of a thing in between, I guess. That kind of plays. It can play in both arenas, but I love going to the zine shows. And the zine shows, when I'm talking to people and I'm looking at the work out there, it feels like art, like and not so
So
much a product.
what would you say the difference is?
I think in some cases it's the end game of the individual making it, like what they're trying to do. Like I don't think a
Can
lot
you
of
not
times.
see like a distinction between them? Like when you're looking at it, can you tell the difference?
Oh, and like the final product.
Yeah.
Usually the zine thing's a little more DIY. Sometimes made straight off of a copy machine. When I started Blister, my first Blister comics, I actually bought a big printer, and I was printing them myself. I had to get toner and all this shit. And I was
That's
printing
punk
them
as
at
fuck.
home, and I was cutting the edges myself, like cutting down. So and I think there's a lot of that. There's people that are, taking their files to work and printing it on their office printer at work, and so it's a lot of that sort of stuff. It's a lot more black and white. It's not so polished. Um, and
Does the polish take something away though? The lack of polish takes something away? Or does it add something?
I think it depends on which side you go to. If you're going to a zine fest, I think because I had some comics that I had done, like superhero parody books, that I was there at the zine fest with. So I sat next to the last time I did a zine fest was a few years ago before COVID, the Chicago Zine Fest. I was seated next to this artist from San Francisco named
Mhm.
Lawrence Lindell. He had just put out this great book. Um, it was basically very positivity towards like his race. Like he's a black artist, and it was like I can't remember what the name of it was, but he had just been on like the Today Show in his town and stuff, and so like there was like swarms of people coming up to like find him, which didn't really help me at all. But it was cool. Like, so like I got to chatting with him a little bit later in the show and stuff though. And he was looking through some of our stuff, and I had done a small blister story in the back of like an anthology that a friend was doing. And he like flipped to that, and he was looking at the parody stuff that was really polished and stuff. And he looked at my blister thing that was a little more rough and stuff. And he was like, "You need to do a book of this." He was like, "I would buy this from you right now." And I was
There
like,
you go.
I do. I know it, but and it took another, I don't know, that was probably 5 years or so ago when I finally have my blister book. But I think that that's something that's a little more appealing in those shows. Um, that maybe is less appealing to some people at a comic show.
I don't know if it's less appealing. I think I
I mean,
really think
everything's
that
got
there
its own
is
crowd.
yeah, I think there's a feeling of realness in certain things. Like you can feel when someone's trying to make a buck. I know that there's no science behind it. I don't care. I know that I can sense intention. I think everybody can sense intention.
Yeah,
And it's fundamentally the controversy that happens in stand-up comedy from time to time. It's like, you know, I I I don't know about you. I can tell when someone's just telling a joke and when someone's trying to make a point.
yeah,
It becomes readily apparent to me very quickly, and not just me. Um,
yeah.
yeah, I think there
There's a place for both.
there is a place for both,
I mean,
certainly.
there's some great indie comic artists that really want to be successful and are really out there doing it and putting just putting in their time and really fighting to get that success. And I wouldn't want to say like, oh, they're not putting out art. I mean,
No, 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 no.
they're not mutually exclusive.
I'm more thinking that um, I think maybe the comic industry and the comic scene as a whole may be harmed more by not being able to make different riffs on Wolverine or
Mm,
Spawn or Spider-Man or insert DC character here. I don't read DC comics.
yeah.
Um, you know, I I've always felt this. I had this conversation with a drummer that I replaced. It was a very awkward meeting. I had heard less than stellar things about his departure,
Uh,
and I was a little nervous because he seemed a little angry about how things shook out. And I didn't really know the guy. I was just the replacement. He ended up coming to a birthday party for my bandmate, and I met him, and uh, very nice dude. But when we had a conversation about the music, he at first thanked me. He was like, "I want to thank you for uh, working on, like, kind of coming up with your own thing and not trying to copy me or anything like that, you know." And then he said something to the effect of like, "I know it would really bother you if someone copied your work, you know, like, you understand, you're a drummer too." And I was like, "Actually, no, I wouldn't care at all." He was like, "Oh, I mean, come on, it wouldn't bother you if someone just like ripped you off like exactly beat for beat." And I thought about it, and I was like, that would be the highest compliment someone could pay to me, is to be like, that song is so good I can't change a thing. And the other advantage I have is if all you have is the ability to copy what I did, I'm already 10 steps ahead of you,
all right.
because that was like my worst work.
Yeah.
You know, I want to do better from here. So please feel free, copy. I'm going to come up with some new shit.
I work in
And
marketing, and the amount of times that a company in the past has come to my company that I used to work for, and said, "My competitor is doing this. I want to do this," and the amount of times that I've been like,
yeah,
"That's a terrible idea. It's already being
right.
done. Like, do the thing, do another thing." Like,
Yeah. Do literally anything but that.
you
Like,
came to us to keep up and copy them. Like,
right. Yeah, that's silly. Yeah, but that's kind of encouraged, right? Like, that I think that part of the problem might be that, people think they deserve the rights to an idea in perpetuity. Um, but
it's
I
like
don't think that. Sorry, go
it's
ahead.
it's like in my case, like when it comes to like Blister. I mean, I wouldn't want somebody jumping out and being like, "Hey, here's my new Blister comic," but also like my Blister stuff is. I mean, it's something that I think only I can write.
Yeah.
Like you're writing
Well,
something else if you're doing that. Like,
that's something that my buddy, he's like really good at business, and he said this to me about, someone was talking to him about a business idea, and they were like, "Yeah, I worry about someone stealing the idea though, so I don't want to talk too much about it." He was like, "No one's gonna steal your idea." It's like,
yeah,
what do you think, they're gonna like do all the hard work that you did for the last 5 years and more to do your thing? No, that's not how anything works.
yep,
Like, no. If you didn't get it off the ground, they don't want any part of it unless
right.
you've already done it. Like, yeah, that's the thing that I have a problem with, is like, if you want to own Superman, well, you can't. You can own Superman, but you can't own flying and being super strong and shooting
Right.
lasers out of your eyes and being from another planet. So what do you even own? The symbol? Come on. What are we doing? This is silly. It doesn't seem like it's going to help anybody. And it's the same with music. I've recently listened to a bunch of pop music in my friend's car when we're driving to and fro. And a lot of it is like direct rip-offs of like stuff from the 60s and 70s and even the 50s that they've now repackaged because the copyrights have been purchased by someone else, and they've repackaged as dance songs and slightly changed the lyrics.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is where we're at? I can't wait to hear the new cut of, Beethoven. I actually kind of am excited about
Yeah, that might be kind of cool.
that. That might be a fucking banger. Who knows?
I love when I so like we watch a lot of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia,
Yeah.
and like all the music from that is all like stuff from like the 1930s and stuff. Like it's all public domain music because they didn't have
Yeah.
any money when they started that show, and it's become part of the show now. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. It's part of the vibe. That's one of my favorite things about that show, actually. Is like
yeah,
the sort of infomercial 1940s infomercial music.
Yep. It definitely does have a vibe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know. Yeah, I think that the whole public domain and all that could be a whole nother animal. But
Certainly. Well, we're at the hour mark, so
yeah,
I don't know if you want to continue, but uh, we can change subjects. Um, but I've kind of said everything I need to say about this one. I don't know about you.
yeah, no, I don't think I have anything to add at this point.
Yeah,
I think we could probably wrap it up for this week. I
yeah.
think we had
I
a
would
lot.
just end it with
Yeah,
buy local, and that includes your music.
yeah,
Um,
and if it's not local, support the little guy that you're checking out on Spotify. I mean,
that's right.
and if you go to a show, buy something because those little bands at the shows, they're not making any money. If you like them, pick up their album, pick up a shirt. I mean, that
Yes,
it goes a long way.
yes, yeah. If you don't support the arts, there are no arts.
Mm-hmm.
So it is really like legitimately just up to us.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, we will be the thing that saves it. So we better get to work.
I just, you know what, not to get restarted again, but when it came to the pandemic, so I've always like supported smaller bands because I worked with smaller bands and stuff. But
Hmm.
when the pandemic hit, it was like I started ordering like albums from bands that were online doing their things because I realized that they're getting us through this. Like,
Yeah,
and I want them to continue, and it's not just going to happen.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And like that's, I'm gonna kind of repeat what I said before. Like, I don't know why we put all this hard work into creating a stable, peaceful society if we're not allowed to make art. It seems kind of pointless. What else were we doing this for? So we could make more widgets? That's
Right.
dumb. Like, I don't want just a phone that can connect me with the world. I want stuff to connect to. And the harder we make that, and the more restrictive that process is, the less people will be involved in it, and all of art suffers as a result.
We've never seen, I mean, we've never seen a world without the arts. You have to go back to like the Wild West or something, like to get.
Even then, there was some crazy dude with a banjo.
That's true. You had the big carnivals that would roll around and stuff with
Yep.
wild stuff. But we have seen a world now recently with COVID and stuff where there was nothing but the arts. Like you
Yep.
couldn't do anything but experience arts. And I think that, yeah, I think people need to realize how fragile that can be.
Yes. Yeah. And how fortunate we've been to be able to take it for granted for so long. That is a privilege. Like, we are very, very lucky to live in a world where we don't have to think about music because it's everywhere all the time, or comics, or communication, you
Yeah.
know. Um, but the stuff we ignore tends to become absolutely essential to pay attention to at certain points. I think we're at one of those points. I think when you see the larger financial forces in the world start to descend on the artistic community and try and like pick its bones, it's it's definitely a time to start trying to plant something new.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this isn't, I'm not meaning this in a doom and gloom way. Every great music movement, every great artistic movement that's ever happened because things stagnated, and that's the catalyst for all the greatness. I think we're entering one of those stages, and I think there's an advantage to being on the ground floor and being involved in the process, because it means you're like doing the right thing. You're doing, the Lord's work.
I hope
Yeah.
that's a fight that we can contribute to here.
Hell yeah.
I'm all for it.
Yeah. Well, we're already doing what we can.
Yeah. All right.
Always a pleasure, man.
Yes, great time as always. We'll be back next week with something. I can't say what it is yet, but
We'll figure it out.
we'll get there. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Ben, thanks for joining me.
Yep. Pleasure.
Glad
I
to join
love
you.
doing this every week.
Yeah, it's good times.
Yeah.
All right. And broadcast.